Hello everyone, welcome to our webinar entitled Weight Management, Hormones and Nutritional Status. Our guest speaker today is Melanie Dorian. My name is Christine Stubbe and I am a medical education specialist at Genova's Asheville branch. I am going to serve as the moderator for today's webinar. We would like to welcome Melanie Dorian. Melanie is an adult geriatric nurse practitioner focusing on preventive and integrative health in teens and adults. She currently is the functional medicine specialist at Downtown Family Healthcare, a family practice in Charlottesville, Virginia, focusing on fatigue, Lyme disease, weight management, and gastrointestinal health. Her approach is grounded in the naturopathic philosophy, and she studied naturopathic medicine at Bastyr University in Washington before doing her nurse practitioner degree at Seattle University. She is a member of the Obesity Medical Association and the Institute for Functional Medicine and has received advanced training in obesity management, nutrition, exercise science, and methylation genetics. She is a former professional cyclist and Quebec Cycling Hall of Fame inductee. Melanie enjoys cycling, running, hiking, cooking, gardening, and spending time with her family. One of the most common questions we get asked during the webinar is about availability of this presentation and the slide deck. These materials will be available on our website within a week of the webinar. If you're interested in having these resources, please click the Learn Now link on the homepage where you will find access to our webinars, or you can also log in to find the webinars in your MyGDX account. If you do not have a MyGDX account, please click on the Getting Started link on our homepage. All right, and now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Melanie Dorian. And we should be good to go here, Melanie. Make sure you unmute yourself.
Yep, can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine, thank you.
Great, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Today we're going to go over weight management with a focus on hormones and nutritional status. Weight management is probably about a third of my practice. I work in an insurance-based primary care clinic, so I see a lot of low-income, uninsured, variety of patients, and weight management has definitely become one of my passions and really helping people get out of unhealthy BMIs and just a lot of patients who are stuck, unsuccessful at losing weight or maintaining weight loss. Some of the objectives for today, we're going to discuss the multifaceted nature of weight gain and obesity. We're going to review a comprehensive evaluation of the overweight and obese patient. We're going to look at specialty diagnostics and treatment and therapeutic options. So now I'm going to go over the commonly viewed pathophysiology of weight gain. And this is an excerpt from the National Institute of Diabetes and Digestive and Kidney Disease. And they really are still in the mindset of calories in, calories out. And as you can read, last sentence here, over time, when people eat and drink more calories than they burn, the energy balance tips towards weight gain and obesity. Well, this is really an oversimplification. I think if really eating less, exercising more were the solutions, we'd be a lot more successful at maintaining healthy weight, getting people to lose weight and maintain their weight loss, and we are not. So we got to get out of that mindset of calories in, calories out, and dig a little bit deeper. This is my view of weight gain, and as you see, I don't believe in the simplification of calories in and calories out. And on the left, you have my little calculation that is calories in plus a lot of things, plus more things, and then calories out. So these are not meant to be curse words. They're just really, there's a lot of items involved in weight gain and obesity. So this is how I view things. And we look at all the multifaceted approach and items that contribute to weight gain. The middle piece of this equation is pretty long and it's becoming lengthier as we're learning more and more about weight gain. Next, Christine. So the factors that lead to weight gain are really multifactorial. Absolutely, there's diet and lifestyle, hormonal influences. We're looking at thyroid, insulin, cortisol, leptin. Leptin is an interesting hormone that we're learning more and more about that contributes to appetite regulation dysfunction, and it can contribute to not only having people crave a lot of foods, never feel full, absolutely contributes to weight gain and other dysregulation. And then nutritional status, I see a lot of nutritional deficiencies in my practice in my obese patients. And then immune and gut imbalances, genetic, epigenetics, neurobehavioral, and of course medical issues. So all of these can contribute to weight gain. Next. In an integrative approach to weight management, we're looking at a really comprehensive approach. And it might help to define what weight management is. And my view of weight management is really that we're looking at prevention of weight gain, we're looking at supporting weight loss, and maintaining weight loss. It's not just dealing with the obese patients. It's looking at people who are gaining weight or seeing a trend of weight gain. They might not be obese yet, but they're concerned about it. The comprehensive evaluation should really use a multi-system questionnaire to help pick up on any issues that patients might not tell you, but are really they're experiencing. And I see a lot of gastrointestinal issues, see a lot of mood issues that patients aren't talking about. I use the Institute for Functional Medicine's multi-system questionnaire. It's a very comprehensive and thorough questionnaire. So it helps me guide either my next step or at least part of my my plan in the next couple weeks with my patients. Where do patients need more focus? And I do screen every patient for sleep disorders. I use the Berlin and the Epworth questionnaire. Simply by doing this, I've picked up on 2 cases now of narcolepsy and multiple cases of obstructive sleep apnea. I also use a diet diary. I don't have patients count calories. We'll get to the diet diary in more detail in a few patients, but I do have patients write down everything they eat, the quality, not the quantity, so the ingredients. A salad is not just a salad. What was in your salad? 5 to 7 days is ideal. I really start seeing good patterns with a 5 to 7 day diet diary. And then setting realistic goals and looking at labs. Next slide. So my evaluation and management are really grounded in the Obesity Medicine Association's training. I get a lot of my info from the Obesity Algorithm, which is a free PDF, extremely comprehensive algorithm about weight management, and this is available on the Obesity Medicine Association's website. So my management is really threefold. I look at improving patient health, improve their quality of life, and also help patients lose weight and improve their body composition. Next. When I look at the diet diary, quantity versus quality, there's a big difference. We know this. 200 calories can be 200 calories of gummy bears or broccoli. And I often bring this picture up during my visits to show patients why they are not going to count calories, or why they're going to stop counting calories for at least a while so they can understand what they're eating. Counting calories or counting points, like certain programs out there, are short-term solutions. They're not sustainable models of understanding what patients eat. So I try and teach patients to track their macronutrients, so grams of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Next. My dietary recommendations often start with a lower carbohydrate intake, moderate protein, higher fat. And these are my guidelines: carb conscious, at or below 120 grams of net carbs. Low carb, I consider low carb about 100 or below 100 of net carbs. And then I do a ketogenic diet. I utilize the ketogenic diet quite often actually with my patients. I found a lot of success with it. It often helps patients get out of the sugar craving that a lot of our patients have, so the carb and the sugar craving. And that you can reach ketogenic depending on the patient's physiology below 60, so 60, 40 grams of net carbs. Some people have to go below 40. The Atkins program, for example, the first 2 weeks is often below 20 grams of net carbs, and then you start reintroducing grams of carbs. Atkins is just an easy example. People know it. There's a lot of resources for it. I usually do a modified Atkins. But those are the types of programs that I will utilize with my patients, or the types of dietary approaches. And we're looking at net carbs. I go over this with my patients right from the beginning, from the first visit, so they understand what they're eating. And the calculation is right there. It's total carbs minus the fiber. Fiber is beneficial, so we don't want to count that in the total carbs. Legumes is a good example of understanding this. Legumes are pretty high in fiber. If you start cutting the legumes down because they're higher in total carbs, you're missing a great source of fiber, good source of protein and nutrients. So read the food labels with the patient. Next. Realistic goals. This is really important, and it's key to successful weight management. I ask patients what their goals are, and have they been at that in the last 10 years? If not, it might not be as realistic. But what I do set with them is looking at a 5 to 10% weight loss. Usually patients can achieve 5 to 10% weight loss in a couple weeks, couple months, depending on their level of motivation and their ability to make changes. And by doing that, we're really setting patients up for success. And a 5 to 10% reduction in weight is really significant. You decrease your risks for heart disease, diabetes, and other complications by quite a significant amount. So help them feel successful. If they come in a couple months, couple weeks later, and they've lost 5%, this is a benchmark that needs to be celebrated. Not with a cookie. You celebrate by a nice hug, a high five, but really encourage your patients. And patients often come in and they're pretty discouraged. They've tried a lot of things. They've never achieved their 50 pounds weight loss. That might not be realistic. So when you help them celebrate these little benchmarks, people feel better. You gain some momentum, and then they want to do more, and they want to make more changes. Next. So my testing in weight management involves a really comprehensive hormone panel. I do a full thyroid evaluation. Genova has a great comprehensive thyroid assessment that includes TSH, free T4, free T3, reverse T3, thyroid antibodies, and then an adrenal evaluation. My metabolic evaluation always includes an A1C. If they haven't had one in the last 6 months, get one for them, find a way to get it for them. If they're Medicare and they've never had high blood sugar, you might have to go with a company like Life Extension, who does testing outside of insurance. Patients can order that themselves. It's a lot cheaper, but the A1C is really important. And then nutritional evaluation. I try and always get a vitamin D, ferritin, even without anemia, B vitamins, red blood cell magnesium. And I love the Nutri-Eval. It's one of my favorite tests. It really allows me to get very specific with my dietary recommendations. Next. And this is just another slide reviewing the specialty diagnostics that are available and that I find very useful. We don't have time to go into the GIFX or Cardiovascular Health Plus genomic, but there's a lot of really fabulous testing that Genova offers to help our obese or overweight patients achieve their goals. Next. Now, switching gears a little bit, we're going to dive into hormonal testing and go into a little bit more about thyroid and adrenals. Next. And why this is important? Well, fat cells, we now know, they're endocrine secretors. They secrete a lot of hormones. We look at leptin, non-beneficial estrogens. They secrete inflammatory markers. So fat cells do secrete quite a few things. And then there's a lot of HPA axis dysfunction in our obese patients. There's absolutely thyroid dysfunction, and this contributes not only to weight gain, but it often prevents successful weight loss, is what I see. I've also seen quite a few cases of people finally getting good glycemic control simply by getting the thyroid right and getting to optimal thyroid management. And then healthy levels of sex hormones support normal body fat. And we know that dietary nutritional deficiencies can affect our hormones. Low-fat craze from the 80s is a great example. People pushing cholesterol really low with either statins or eating very low cholesterol. Well, we need cholesterol to make our hormones. And then about one third of patients, men with type 2 diabetes, are now recognized as being low in testosterone. So it is really important in weight management to do a good hormonal evaluation. Next. And this is a little bit small, so I apologize, but this is just to re-emphasize that we need cholesterol. All of these great hormones that we need, including cortisol, DHEA, testosterone, starts with cholesterol, goes to pregnenolone, and then goes down. But it is important to eat some fats and for patients to have good amounts of healthy cholesterol. Next. So the complete hormone is a test that I use quite a bit. I always add on the cortisol because it gives us a lot of good insight. It gives me a lot of good insight about their adrenal health. It's a 24-hour urine collection, so we see a good picture of overall how their adrenals are functioning. It also gives us a ton of information. That previous slide, all these hormones are tested in the complete hormones, so we get a really, really good picture of where they are hormonally, and it allows you to monitor if you're supplementing with pregnenolone, DHEA, or testosterone, it will be helpful in seeing how things are going overall. Next. The adrenal cortex stress profile, that is the salivary cortisol and DHEA. I think about that when I see that there's, or I hear that there's a lot of fatigue in my overweight and obese patients, and I know they're probably not going to be compliant with my recommendations. If they're exhausted, it's really hard to, at the end of the day, make healthy choices about diet or to go exercise when they're already tired. So I use this in a lot of my fatigued patients to see where the dysfunction is coming from. Are they feeling fatigue not yet crashed? Are they crashed? Are they sleeping well? Are they not sleeping well? If they're not sleeping well, I love to see this curve, because are they in fact the high cortisol, the dysfunctional reverse curve, high cortisol in the evenings or late afternoon and evening, therefore preventing them from having good restful sleep. So I utilize this test, and especially when I see and I hear there's a lot of fatigue going on. So this allows me to look at their DHEA and their cortisol and then tailor the regimen, supplements based on that. Next. This was a great study based on the MESA study with a multi-ethnic study of atherosclerosis. Over 1,000 patients were evaluated, and they did salivary cortisol for 3 days on these patients, and they found that diurnal salivary cortisol is in fact associated with body mass index and waist circumference, and they were negatively correlated to low cortisol if there was a shift in the curve. So lower cortisol in the morning, patients had higher BMI and bigger waist circumferences. So we do see that there's a dysfunction in these overweight and obese patients, and effectively the takeaway from this message, from this study, was that low morning cortisol was bad, and it's usually we see this in periods of high stress, long periods of high stress, long periods of high cortisol, which contributes to weight gain. But then when they're at the point of being overweight, obese for months or years, often their morning cortisol is low. So this is really important. Thus, doing the salivary cortisol is helpful for a lot of our patients. Next. The adrenal support that I use, I love herbal adaptogens. And adaptogens are herbs that will help your body modulate the stress response, adapt better to stress. They're also known as tonics in the herbal world, and they're very supportive. There's a variety of them. These are just a couple examples: ashwagandha, rhodiola, and schisandra. And I've listed 3 products that I use a lot that I really love. I've had a lot of success with my pure encapsulation products, the Phyto-ADR and the Energy Extra. They seem to really invigorate and energize patients. The Phyto-ADR might be a little bit too stimulating for patients with anxiety, so just be a little bit cautious. The Energy Extra or the Gaia's Adrenal Health might be a better fit, but definitely consider an adrenal adaptogen support for patients who are tired, stressed. You do their cortisol's on the low end. So these are good examples of herbal support that can help your patients. Next. These are nutrients that I use. There's a variety of them, and these are the doses that I try and use. So I'm not going to go over them individually, but these are the nutrients that I use when I know either I've tested it or they're just so symptomatic of having adrenal issues. So these are the doses that I try and use. It's a lot of supplements, and I tell my patients it's not forever. These are the supplements we're going to start with, and we're going to take you off a lot of these. But often it's helpful because the adrenals are the biggest users of vitamin A, vitamin C, for example. So getting those levels up is very beneficial for patients. I had one patient, this was about 1.5 years ago, overweight patient, adrenally very fatigued. I started her on this protocol. I did the 25,000 IUs of vitamin A, for example. When she followed up 1.5 months later, her vision had improved. This is definitely something that doesn't happen all the time, but she was so depleted in her vitamin A that her vision was starting to be impacted. So this was such a great example of support the adrenals, get high doses of nutrients at the beginning, get the adrenals replenished. Other deficiencies will get better. Other things will get better. Patients will feel better. Next. Furthering the adrenal support conversation, I have a lot of the tired and wired, and a lot of you know what I'm talking about. Those patients who report being tired, they're exhausted but yet they can't fall asleep at night, or their sleep is very disrupted and frequent waking, just can't fall asleep. They wake up 2, 3 a.m., they can't fall back asleep. So these are things that I utilize in my patients who are what I call my tired and wired. Phosphatidylserine is a great supplement to get cortisol levels down. I use the cortisol manager supplement. I'll use it in the late afternoons and evenings. I wouldn't use phosphatidylserine in the middle of the day with patients who are very fatigued because you can potentially further crash their cortisol, but I do use it at night or late afternoon and evening. GABA is a great supplement. I also use a variety of homeopathics. Calms Forte by Highlands is one example. And then mind-body therapies. These are really important to teach your patients. If you don't do them yourself yet, learn either just deep breathing or very short meditations, guided meditations. Lots of YouTube videos online to help that. And then when needed, if my patients are very, very crashed, cortisol is low, and they're really exhausted, I might consider low dose of hydrocortisone, Cortef, when appropriate. I monitor those patients very closely, and I've had multiple patients that were finally able to get out of their funk and start exercising and start losing weight with short-term of low-dose hydrocortisone. Next. Now switching to the thyroid, this is a comprehensive thyroid assessment. And multiple labs, our clinic, for example, we have LabCorp. I can order all of these through LabCorp, but when I started, it was a little bit confusing, and I really loved having the support from Genova and using their comprehensive thyroid assessment because everything was there. I didn't have to think too much about it in terms of what to order, and the information that's in the report is very helpful. And don't look only for normal levels, look for optimal levels. So these are my optimal levels of TSH for T4, for T3, and then a reverse T3. I like to see it under 20. I've seen that be pretty consistent with my patients. When the reverse T3 is above 20, remember that reverse T3 is in the same receptors as T3. So if reverse T3 is high, it will block your T3. You see a high reverse T3 in mitochondrial dysfunction, so think insulin resistance, diabetes. In my neck of the woods in Virginia, I see a lot of Lyme disease, so I see elevated reverse T3s. Also an elevated cortisol, iron and selenium deficiencies are all states that can cause elevated reverse T3. Next. This is just a quick reminder. There's a lot of overlap and influence between the adrenals and the thyroid. So if you look here at the bottom right, cortisol, or in the middle right, the cortisol will affect TSH. So will inflammation. So when you order only a TSH, or patients have had this done for years, only having a TSH ordered, well, a lot of things can affect TSH, so it might not be a reliable marker by itself of thyroid function and thyroid health. So look at other things. Therefore, the panel doing a comprehensive thyroid evaluation. So high cortisol will affect TSH. It also affects the conversion of T4 to T3. You can downregulate that. Next. Yet another picture of thyroid physiology. But this is really to highlight the importance of stress and low-calorie diet and inflammation in our patients. So the big red arrows here on the left, when your patients are really stressed and they've had a lot of yo-yo dieting, low-calorie, starvation-like diets, they've done a lot of those. Often there's going to be a dysfunction in leptin, like I mentioned earlier, but also their thyroid might just be downregulated, or we're pushing all the T4 into reverse T3 and not into T3. So we've got to dig a little bit deeper and really help our patients at the root cause. Next. Thyroid support, a variety of nutrients are helpful. I use Thorne's thyroxine a lot and Pure Encapsulation's Thyroid Support Complex. These are a combination of nutrients, selenium, zinc, iodine, iron. Some of them have iron. I love the ones that have methylated B for the patients who have MTHFR or other methylation defects. So if they can tolerate the methyl Bs, it's really helpful. I try and get the toxin load down, get cortisol down, clean up those livers. Often our patients with insulin resistance or diabetes have some dysfunction at the liver. Well, about 60% of the conversion of T4 to T3 happens in the liver. So getting a little bit of liver support, milk thistle, or other herbals to support liver detox is often very beneficial at the beginning. And again, if the reverse T3 is high, women are on oral contraceptives. They could be estrogen dominant. So considering, if possible, getting them off of their oral contraceptives, at least for a period of time while you correct these hormonal issues. And then medication, if they don't want to get off of their Synthroid and they're very hesitant to change their medication, you might want to consider adding a little bit of T3, so Cytomel. I use a lot of combination medications. My preference is Thyroid. Their Armor is great. WP Thyroid is also good. Thyroid in my area just has very good insurance coverage. And there's a lot of dosing options, so you can micro change the doses when there's a lot of dosing options, which is really nice. Some patients, if their reverse T3s are very high, I try and lower the T4 dose or simply get them off of T4 for a period of time so the reverse T3 can go down, and I just use a little bit of T3. Next. Nutritional panel. So this is a quick snapshot of the Nutri-Eval. Next slide. So why is a nutritional panel useful? Well, us humans are pretty bad at recalling information from the past, from the day before or a couple days ago, especially when it comes to food intake. So we really don't get accurate nutrient intake assessment just via dietary recalls. And there's a low correlation between dietary questionnaires and levels of nutrients. And nutritional deficiencies are definitely prevalent in the overweight and obese population. Just think about the patients who are on statins or metformin, PPIs. Next slide. And this is another picture showing all the medications that can cause nutritional deficiencies. So this is really important to take into account when the patients are coming to you and they're on a lot of medications. They've been on these for a long time. They are going to have nutritional deficiencies, and it's potentially contributing to a great extent to their fatigue or their hormonal imbalances, so correcting that is really critical. Next slide. So the Nutri-Eval, it really helps individualize the assessment of where the deficiencies are, but it really helps tailor the regimens. Supplements are expensive. My population, I have a lot of uninsured, Medicare, Medicaid, low-income patients. We have to make really good decisions about where to spend our money. So doing the Nutri-Eval really helps me get very specific with my recommendations, and then we prioritize. I often have to make choices with patients about what's going to be your best bet, and sometimes it is just a really high-end multivitamin. So I help the patients make those decisions based on the Nutri-Eval, and it's really, really helpful. Next slide. So here we see the first page of the Nutri-Eval is a quick overview, but it's really well laid out, color-coded. Patients can understand this, and it's easy to see where the higher needs are and where you can further support your patients. Next slide. The next page is a more detailed evaluation and recommendations of the first slide. So then you start looking at exactly the amount that your patients are going to need to get those deficiencies fixed. And then also you got to look at this. They do their indirect measurement of digestive support. So for patients, if they're reporting a lot of gastrointestinal distress, this will give you a really good hint about probiotics, digestive enzymes, or herbal support such as bitters to improve digestion. You're looking also at fatty acids, so the omega-3s. So it gives us a lot of good information. Next. And talking about the fatty acids, the omega-3s, the Nutri-Eval goes into all these details, and a lot of these metabolites just by themselves are not necessarily pertinent. These are put into algorithms that Genova developed to give us some of those recommendations that we saw in the earlier pages. But I do like to look and make sure they have nice high levels of omega-3s, lower levels of omega-6. So if someone is standard American diet, has a lot of canola oil or some of the other vegetable oil that contribute a lot to inflammation in omega-6, we often need to shift that. This is where the Nutri-Eval comes in, is that it'll give us those details. And at the bottom, you'll see some of the ratios, the omega-3 and the omega-6, omega-3 ratios. So this is really beneficial in helping educate the patients and help them understand why you're changing what you're changing, or recommending what you're recommending. Next. So this was an interesting study that compared the use of medications with supplementing with EPA-DHA, so or omega-3s, in patients with RA, and they found that about a 47% reduction in the use of pain medications, so NSAIDs, for example, in the patients who were using fish oils. And we're looking at higher doses of fish oils. And normally, higher doses of fish oils, you're looking at 2 to 3 grams, sometimes higher per day. So this was really significant in showing that RA patients, and how many of our obese patients have arthritis, can get resolution of their pain symptoms and their pain with the use of fish oil. It can also help with weight loss. It helps patients feel fuller, in addition to decreasing pain and inflammation. Next. Next. So this is another study that showed that a diet that was higher in omega-3s can help with weight loss, help patients feel fuller, feel better, and they were therefore more successful at losing and maintaining weight loss. So one of my recommendations when I start with patients, especially if they have insulin resistance, I start with fish oil, magnesium, and then depending on what else is going on. Even before I see the Nutritional, I often start with high-dose fish oils, magnesium, and then maybe some blood sugar support if they have insulin resistance. Next. So inflammation, the Nutritional also goes into detail about oxidative stress markers, and do patients need a lot of support there? Are they totally inflamed? Their glutathione's totally low, or their CoQ10 is totally low. So this really does allow us, and you'll see this in your patients who are on statins or have been on PPIs or on other blood pressure meds that lower CoQ10. They often are going to need a lot more support at the beginning. Next slide. Vitamin D, the Nutrival, you can add on the vitamin D. You can also order it through your traditional labs, but vitamin D, you also see down the list here on the left that obesity has been associated with suboptimal levels of vitamin D. So it's important to test for all these nutrients. Next. So to summarize, our role in weight management is really to dig deeper for the underlying causes. It is not just calories in, calories out. There's a lot of dysfunction at multiple levels. Obesity is a complex disease, and multiple tests from Genova are going to help us in looking at these underlying causes, such as hormonal testing, like we talked about, the complete hormones, the stress, adrenocortex stress profile, and then the Nutrival. And remember also, if your patients can't afford these, even though these tests have good insurance coverage, if they can't afford it, a lot of these you can test via standard labs, but they don't go into as much depth as some of these panels do. But really our job is to dig deeper and to support the patients and support where the underlying causes of these dysfunctions are happening. Next. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and go into 2 cases that I've seen in my practice. And these are good cases in that both of these were not obese patients, but they were patients noticing weight gain, noticing fatigue, and weight was definitely one of their primary concerns. So my first patient was a 42-year-old male. He presented for weight gain, low testosterone, and fatigue. Next. When I first saw him, his vitals were normal, BMI, overweight, and he had a past history, years of fatigue, low testosterone. He was put on DHEA, low dose, and zinc by a previous practitioner, but never increased. This was about 2 years ago. Patient did not note any difference in his symptoms. Other part of his history, strong history of allergies and asthma. He's taking multiple inhalers and antihistamines, some abdominal pain, and elevated triglycerides. He would try and exercise regularly, mostly some running, but his energy was really impacting his ability to be compliant with exercise. He was just too tired and wasn't recovering, very low stamina. His work, he's a work analyst, very high stress position, had about 20 people under him, and he took a couple supplements, not a lot, a few vitamins, cinnamon also for sugar control and to help with weight loss. He wasn't on any specific diet, but after a diet diary review, he did eat quite a bit of grains, including gluten, but he had good amounts of fruit and vegetables, so that was encouraging. He was at least doing that well. Next. And then what I did at the first visit is I increased his DHEA to 50 milligrams, and I told him to slowly continue increasing it by about 25 milligrams every other week as tolerated. We also changed his diet, so lower carb. I went low carb with him, so at or below 100 grams of net carbs. I cut the refined sugars and I limited caffeine. He was a big coffee drinker. I started a B complex with methylated Bs, and then I did some blood work at that visit, and I got his blood results, and his triglycerides were very high. His testosterone was still low, so I started a compounded testosterone to just do daily, and then cholesterol management by orthomolecular to get his cholesterol under control. Next. So this was his result that I got a couple weeks after our first visit, and if you look on the left here, you look at the cortisol, and then the cortisol and cortisol metabolite. So he's on the lower end of the cortisol, not totally deficient, but he's starting to be low. But his metabolites are pretty high, so he's starting to struggle. He's using every little bit of cortisol and cortisone. Next slide. And then testosterone, that was low, that was expected to be low. But then, like I mentioned earlier, the metabolites were very high. And click again, Christine. And when you see those markers, these correlate really well with high stress, or strenuous exercise, inflammation, insulin resistance, hypothyroid, and all of this information is in the Nutri-Eval report. So for him, this really highlighted that we needed to get his stress under control. So that's where I focused a little bit more of my support. Next. So we supported his adrenals a little bit more and got a little bit more support for his testosterone. So I did adaptogens. I believe I did the phyto-ADR with him, and then switched coffee to green tea, nettles, add some ground flaxseed to support his testosterone pathway, and I used tribulus by pure encapsulation to further support his testosterone pathway. Next. My other case he is a 52-year-old male, and he presented for exercise intolerance, fatigue, and he was noticing slow weight gain. Next. He was a lifelong runner, but for the last 3 years he noticed that his stamina has significantly decreased. He was formerly a marathon runner, very competitive age group runner, and he could no longer do this. He was barely able to tolerate 10Ks. Even yoga was becoming harder. He had seen a whole bunch of specialists. Everything was within normal limits. Was given albuterol to try because, well, they didn't know what else to do. And he didn't have any relief. He wasn't using a spacer, so we tried with a spacer, but that wasn't it. There was not a high toxic exposure, so I didn't, on my list was not very high of potentially mold or toxins. And his history also constipation. He had to take Metamucil every day. With that, he was getting bowel movements every day. But strong family history of cardiovascular disease and celiac, so I suspected some genetic issues. So I did the Nutri-Eval with him. Next, with genetics, so I did the MTHFR and the COMT, and these are his vitals. So he was 24.5, so gaining weight, and this is from a very slim, much lower BMI athlete, and also his blood pressure was starting to go up a little bit. So after further genetic testing, we found that he was positive for HLA-DQ2, which is a celiac marker. His A1C was 5.6, and you can see on the right, he was homozygous for MTHFR 677. So for him, this was really critical to start supporting him at a genetic level and make some big changes in his diet. He was from the 80s in terms of his philosophy, carb loading, and eating very low fat. So, and the other thing we found with the Nutri-Eval is that he had elevated levels of mercury. He was eating, after I looked at the diet diary, lots of the bigger fishes, higher mercury fish. So we needed to make quite a few changes. Next. So this is his Nutri-Eval. So there's multiple borderline issues here. And so not a lot of severely deficient nutrients, but enough borderline things. Remember, he's an athlete, so he's going to need optimal levels of everything. Next. And then he definitely needed some antioxidant support, some glutathione, and he needed to get that mercury out. So we're still in the phase of getting mercury out of him using ALA, a variety of other things, but simply changing his diet is going to be very important, critical for this patient, because he was eating fish multiple times a week, and the bigger fish, so higher mercury fish, so we changed that. Next. And we also got him gluten-free. He not likely was celiac at that time, but I explained to him his risks, and one of his kids had celiac disease and another family member, so he was definitely at higher risk. So we cut the gluten, decreased grains, went lower carb conscious with him, and reduced the high mercury fish. And we did a gut healing protocol for about a month or two to get him off the Metamucil, get his bowels regulated, and get him having a bowel movement daily without Metamucil. Definitely started methylated Bs. I started with sublingual just because he had potentially compromised absorption because of his history with constipation, and also trace mineral complex and the liposomal glutathione. And he reported at the next 2 visits, I haven't seen him in a few months, but the next 2 visits, even just 1 month later, he reported feeling much better. He was off the Metamucil, his stamina and exercise tolerance had increased, and he was starting to increase his runs, and he was tolerating them. So he was starting to thrive again and extremely excited. So I haven't seen him in a while. Hopefully he'll follow up soon. But he was starting to be able to exercise, and his workouts were harder and longer, which is very encouraging. So overall, and his weight had gone down. He had lost a couple pounds at his follow-up a month later. And then a 2-month follow-up, he had lost a couple more pounds. So these are just great examples of patients who weren't obese, but they were heading there, certainly, and they were just not feeling well and difficult to maintain diet and exercise changes because they were not feeling well. So I'll give this back to you now, Christine.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Melanie. That was a really informative presentation. We've received a lot of great feedback and questions. I do want to remind everyone that the PowerPoint will be available on our website in PDF format next week. So we did receive quite a few questions. We'll try to answer as many as we can right now. Melanie, the first question is, when nutritionally supporting the thyroid, would this be in addition to taking Synthroid or levothyroxine?
If patients are already on a medication, I often keep them on the medication. I optimize their regimen if it's not already optimized. And yes, I will support nutritionally. Often we can get them on lower doses, and I've had this a couple times happen where at follow-up labs, 6 to 8 weeks later, after putting them on nutritional support, their thyroid function improved, and now we were over-medicating. So I've had this multiple times where I had to decrease the dose, so patients were very encouraged and then became very compliant with their supplement recommendations, because we can bring some thyroid function back, especially if it's related to nutritional deficiencies. So yes, often I will do both.
Wow, that's very encouraging. Okay, another question here. Is there any problem with COMT and taking rhodiola?
I haven't seen that be the case. If providers are experiencing that, it'd be great to know that. I haven't seen that. I use a lot of my adaptogenic combinations with rhodiola, and patients with COMT seem to tolerate that. So I haven't seen a pattern, but I may not have been looking for it. So I'm going to start paying attention to that to see if that's the case. What I do see a problem with my patients with COMT is they often don't tolerate the methylated Bs right at the beginning or ever for some patients. So I use different forms of Bs. I'll use the hydroxy or a folinic form just to avoid potentially pushing the anxiety over. But I haven't seen it be the case with rhodiola.
Great, thank you. We're getting a lot of questions here about low-carb diets and ketosis. So what's your protocol around it? How long do you recommend someone be in ketosis? And, you know, when do you reintroduce carbs?
So it'll vary from patient to patient, and I really try and feel it out with patients. If they're feeling very deprived, it's becoming more stressful because it can be hard. Below 60-40 grams of net carbs per day is challenging. And so I'll see if they're starting to be discouraged and it's becoming more stressful, and then their cortisol is going up. Well, it's time to bring back some carbs and get them out of ketogenesis. But often I'll encourage them to at least try it for 2 to 4 weeks is really where I've seen the best results. And after that, what I've started doing also with some of my patients is getting them back to maybe a low carb or carb conscious patients, but doing 1 or 2 days a week of ketosis, of bringing back ketogenic. They might not get into ketosis in only 24, 48 hours, but often that's enough to maintain or decrease their carb cravings, decrease their sugar cravings. So it really varies. I have one patient, he was morbidly obese and he was extremely motivated. I started ketogenic diet right away, and he's, gosh, by this point he's lost like 50, 60 pounds over months. This is not super rapid, but the first 1 to 2 months he lost so much weight. This was a patient I was really concerned about. Heart failure, he had pitting edema. I mean, it was so symptomatic of heart failure. But it was all this fluid because of all the glycogen that he was storing. And remember that carbs, glycogen, they attract water. So a lot of our patients who have a higher carb diet often retain a lot more water. So for him, I've kept him ketogenic for months, but he was fine with it. He didn't feel deprived. He was feeling better. Energy was higher, much higher, up, and he just keeps thriving and improving. So, and within the first month, he lost so much water. He said, and he contacted me because he was getting concerned. I mean, he was peeing so much the first 2 weeks, so we just kept him really hydrated. So when I saw him at follow-up, his pitting edema was almost totally gone in a month, which is amazing.
It is
so, yeah, it's really amazing. So it really depends. But some patients, they just can't do it for more than 2 weeks. But it will help their metabolism in 2 weeks. And then you just slowly increase carb. Usually I try and increase by maybe 5, more like 15, 20 grams of carbs per day. So for the first week, we're like, okay, we're going to increase by about 15 to 20 grams of carbs in a day and see how you do. If they start gaining weight rapidly, that's just too much for them, so you slow that down. So you really have to reintroduce things very slowly. I usually reintroduce grains last because that seems to be the least tolerated form of carbohydrate. I reintroduce starchy veggies, so sweet potatoes first, things like that, or just more fruit. And then we see. And I have some people who do end up tolerating grains fairly well, but often it's the last form of carbohydrate, the type of carbohydrate that I'll reintroduce, and I'll prefer the non-gluten grains at first, just because of the high prevalence of gluten sensitivity. So that's normally what I do, but a lot of it, I mean, I follow up with my patients often every 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes more than that. So I'm able to really change protocols or change their plan pretty rapidly. So if they're not doing well, they're not thriving, I'll get them off of ketogenic and I'll start reintroducing carbs very slowly. And they do have to track. So I have patients weigh themselves every day or every other day if it's not a trigger for them. If I have a patient with a history of anorexia, I might not do that. But otherwise, I do have patients weigh themselves regularly and then monitor. And they'll see, often patients will tell me, they tell me, oh, I can do about 100 grams of carbs, net carbs per day. I can't do any more. I've tried now multiple times, and I start gaining weight. And I start feeling fatigued, or I get the brain fog back, which is what I hear a lot. Mm-hmm. So it really depends. This is where functional medicine and integrative medicine shines. One size doesn't fit all for these types of diet. And ketogenic, I'm pretty aggressive with using ketogenic with my patients if they're game for it. And a lot of patients, they like the books that have the programs and the books that are out there, such as the Atkins book, or the new Atkins for You is a new book written actually by some practitioners and some members of the Obesity Medicine Association. They've revised the Atkins, so a healthier Atkins. But those are easy plans to follow. They have step-by-step recipes. They have meal plans, so those are easy. I have some general meal plan handouts that I've made for my patients, but they're general guidelines. I don't go day by day, meal by meal, what to eat. So someone who wants that, I'll either collaborate with a local dietitian who helps me with that, or I will direct them to some of these books that have meal plans with daily meals.
Great, thank you. And then if you are doing higher protein diets with patients, how do you modify for patients with kidney disease or gout?
So I try and do more of a moderate type of protein intake, but often they do end up with a higher protein intake, and I bring in vegetarian proteins or fish and seafood proteins. I really try and balance them out. So a patient with kidney disease, I might not be as strict. So I'm a lot more cautious. I often don't put them on ketogenic diet. I utilize more of a combination of carb conscious and an alkaline diet in those cases with kidney disease. And then with gout, I'm cautious in pushing the meats, for example, so I'll go with more of the vegetarian types of protein, fish and seafood with them, and it's been going pretty well. I don't think I've had one case of gout flare-up with doing these diets with this approach, so pretty successful right now doing that, but I am very cautious. I do monitor them pretty regularly, and I monitor their kidney function absolutely. So, I tell patients, if you think this is going to cause a flare-up, we're not going to do it, of their gout, for example, and we're going to be more carb conscious. But I do try and have a little bit higher ratio of vegetarian proteins and fish or seafood, which don't seem to be as big of triggers for patients.
Great, thanks. And then there was a question about if you could explain the fasting leptin test. So it's not a test that Genova offers, but if you could just explain that test.
Correct. So when I do the history of my patients and they report a lot of yo-yo dieting or these low-calorie, almost starvation-like diets, and they've done those a lot or they've done one for a long period of time, this will push leptin up. And at a certain point, similar to insulin resistance, if leptin levels are up, you can have leptin resistance. This is something we're starting to explore a lot more and we're starting to understand more in weight management. But I do a fasting leptin on those patients who also report having issues with regulating their appetite. So they never feel full after a meal. So that can also be they're just eating under stress. But those patients who have paid attention and they look around them, they're not stressed, but they look around them and everybody's actually done with their meal and everybody seems to feel full. But these patients are just never full. They don't feel full. They always crave food at night. It's not necessarily the carbs or the sugar. They're just hungry all the time. So when you see that, a fasting leptin is really informative. And where that directs my management is that they might need, sooner rather than later, a weight loss medication. And I use a variety of weight loss medications, but when you see a high leptin, these patients often have been suffering for a long time, suffering in that they feel hungry all the time, and it's an awful place to be. And I had one patient that I started working with, and this was the case for her. And so we changed her diet, put her low carb, modified a bunch of things, got exercise, got her using a Fitbit, doing all this stuff. And then digging a little deeper at the second and third visit, she finally said, and she had tears, she said, "Listen, Melanie, I never, ever feel full. I'm always hungry. I also, she worked late night, so it was a little challenging, but she said, I'm starving. I am starving. I go to bed hungry." Well, survival here, hunger is powerful. You're not going to lose, you're not going to win against these strong hormones that direct appetite. So if you have leptin resistance, your leptin is high, and patients feel hungry, they're going to eat. People are insane. They're not meditating about this 10 hours per day. So when you feel hungry, you're going to eat. And when it's happening all the time, well, you're eating more. So I started her on a weight loss medication. I actually started her on Contrave. And within a month, she started feeling better. Second month, she came in and she was so happy. She started crying. She said, "Melanie, for the first time in my life, I feel full." And it was amazing, the transformation. And then she got so motivated. She started using that Fitbit like crazy and posting things on Facebook and keeping herself accountable. And I mean, we just got so much momentum by just getting her appetite under control. For the first time in her life, but her leptin was off the charts, really high, really, really high. And I told her, I said, "Listen, let's consider weight loss medication." And she was open to it. She was so sick of struggling with it and so sick of feeling hungry. And this really is what set her up for success. And she lost a significant amount of weight and was not feeling hungry, so was not struggling. And it took some of the pressure off of her. I told her, listen, this is not your fault. You're not just weak-willed and you have no self-control. And she had thought that about herself for years. And this is a tough place to be emotionally. But I explained to her the hormones behind that drive, and it was such a relief for her. It was such a relief. So it was really powerful to start that medication and just understanding the high levels of leptin. So that's how I use it. And always morning fasting leptin is helpful. And above 20, if you see it in the 30s or 40s, really ask them about their appetite. You know, are they binge eaters or have they been binge eaters? Have they history of anorexia, history of feeling hungry all the time, history of yo-yo dieting? It's pretty consistent is what I'm seeing. I don't have a lot of those cases, but I've had them enough times now that it's definitely something I don't want to miss.
Right. All right. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. In the interest of time, we're going to end our question and answer period there. For additional educational materials, we'd like to encourage you all to visit our website, www.gdx.net. On this site, you'll find sample reports, kit instructions, and other information for all of our profiles by clicking on the Clinicians tab at the top of the page or by logging into your MyGDX account. You can also access it by clicking on the Learn Now link on the home page. After taking advantage of the materials found on our website, feel free to contact client services with your questions. You'll see a number on the slide for US and UK customer service. Additionally, please call client services if you need assistance in setting up a MyGDX account. We also offer complimentary appointments with our medical education specialists to answer questions related to our testing, including choosing the right test and reviewing patient test results. We'd like to encourage you to look for upcoming webinars on our website. Next month, we will have Dr. Stephen Olmsted speaking on modulating the gut microbiome, the role of probiotics and prebiotics. Well, I'd like to thank you again, Melanie, for a great presentation and thank the audience for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.